Okay, today's stuff is Zevachim Ayin Ches 78, and we begin at the bottom of 77b at the Mishnah. The last Mishnah on the page, 4 lines from the bottom. Dam shenisarv b'mayim. You have blood of a carbon, and it gets mixed with water. Okay, so as we're going to see, we often use the criteria, as we've seen already before, of bitul, batul, barov, right? What's the proportion of volume of the two things that got mixed? But in this case, it's more a question of appearances. Im yesh bo maris dam kasher. If it looks like blood, if it, you can add quite a lot of water to blood actually, and it'll still have that reddish color. So if it still looks like blood, then it can still be used. Okay, then the blood, it's still considered blood and still considered valid for zrika. Nisar of biyayin. What if it gets mixed up with wine? Now, obviously, with wine, and we're assuming it's red wine, you could add as much red wine as you want. It's still going to be red, right? It'll never dilute the color because they're two things of the same color. So what's the rule there? How much wine can be mixed in and still for it to be considered blood? So roin also ki'ilu humayim. So you look at it as if it were water. In other words, if this wine that got mixed into the blood were water, would the blood still look like blood with the same volume? Right? You get it? So you basically, it's the same proportion, whatever that proportion is. And it's odd that the Mishnah doesn't give a number, right? Because like blood is blood and water is water. Like the Mishnah should be able to say if it's like 10 to 1, then it's okay. But more than that, then it's too diluted and it doesn't look like blood anymore. But for whatever reason, the Mishnah leaves it up to us to determine um, what is the proportion that would still have it look like blood if water got mixed in, and we'll use the same proportion if red wine got mixed in.
But it will
Now,
always be red.
well, it'll always be red, but that's why we're saying the Mishnah is saying that whatever the proportion is for water to too much water that would make it puzzle, that would make it not look like blood anymore, then that is the same volume of wine that got mixed in that we're going to use the same rule. So, as I said, you could pour in as much wine as you want. You could pour in 100 times as much wine as there is blood, and it'll still look red because the wine is red. All right. So, what you do is you determine how much water would make it not look like blood anymore, and that's how much wine that's would make it puzzle, and that's how much wine would also make it puzzle if it got mixed in. Clear?
So that would hold for beet juice, for instance, or any other red wine.
Exactly. Exactly. I assume so. Um, now, so that is something that has nothing to do with it's not actual blood, right? Now, nisar b'dam behemo b'dam chaya. What if the blood of the carbon got mixed up with the blood of some other animal, right? A non-kudshim animal. Rowing also kilumayim. Same. We look at it as if it's water, and we use the same proportion. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein dam mevatel dam." No, that's different. Blood, if any other blood gets mixed into the blood of the carbon, that doesn't become that doesn't get canceled or doesn't get nullified. That makes it possible. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now, nisariv b'dam sulim. What if the blood of a carbon got mixed up with the blood of of sanctified animals that had become puzzle for whatever reason? It could be pigul or any other reason. Yishafech lama. Then basically you can't use it for the as a carbon. You can't do the zrika with it. You pour it into the drainage, right? There's the amma is like a aqueduct that went through the mikdash that carried water and whatever and blood from the floor, whatever, carried it all out. So pour it into the drain. Bedamat samsis. What if the blood of the carbon got mixed up with dam hatamsis? So dam hatamsis is not the first blood that comes out. So when you do a carbon, you do the shchita, and the first blood that comes out of the neck is the blood that gets sprinkled on the mizbeach that you do the rest of the avoda with. After that first spurt, that's the any remaining blood that comes out is called dam hatamtzis, and that is not valid for zrika. It's not valid for the avoda. You have to use the first spurts of blood that come out of the animal. That's called dam hanefesh, the first spurts. So if it got mixed up with, so this is invalid blood basically. It's so same. The Mishnah says yishafech lama, gets poured down the drain. Rabbi Eliezer machshir. Rabbi Eliezer says that this dam hatamsis is okay if it's mixed into the dam ha nefesh. It's okay, and we'll see why in the Gemara. Im lo nimlach v'nasan. But now, what if you didn't look up the rule? This happened. Um, you mix the you somehow mix the dam hatamtzis into the dam hanefesh, and then you did the zrika anyway. You didn't ask anybody. You didn't look it up. You didn't say what's the rule here. You just used it for zrika. Then the zrika is kosher. The zrika is valid, even though you shouldn't have used it. So it's a bit. It seems like a lechatchila and b'diavad thing.
Why
Okay.
can't he just say relied on Rabbi Eliezer?
Well, but if we don't pass on like Rabbi Eliezer, then if it's a Doraisa thing, if it's a Ma'akev thing, then we don't pass like Rabbi Eliezer, then it would be invalid, right?
When
What
do
we're
we
saying
ever
here is the
when
the
do we ever
argument
rely
is.
on Rabbi Eliezer?
I'm sorry, say again.
When do we ever rely on
When
Rabbi
do we ever
Eliezer?
rely on Rabbi Eliezer? Yeah, okay. But the point is, it's clearly a um, not a ma'akev thing. It's not something that is required. It's something that l'chatchila you should do, not use this dam hatamsis. But if it did get mixed up into the dam hanefesh, then b'diavad is fine. Amar Reb Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yaakov. Reb Chia said, "Lo shanu el shenaflu mayim l'toch dam." What we're talking about here is when you have a lot of blood and some water fell into it. Afal nafal dam utoch mayim. But if you have a bucket of water and your blood drops into it, like bit by bit, rishon batel, then what happens is as the blood is entering the water, it becomes batel. Right? Let's say imagine that it's dripping, although the same would apply to if you're pouring it, but imagine that it's dripping. Okay, the first drop of blood is in the bucket of water clearly is no good, right? Clearly that's a water mixture, not a blood mixture, right? And even if you go by the color, one drop of blood in this whole thing of water is not going to have an effect. So each drop that falls in becomes batel. Um, so he's saying what the Mishnah is talking about is water falls into the blood. Okay, then each drop of water is subsumed by the blood. That makes more sense. Amar Rav Papa, L'Iyan Kisoy Ein Okay. When it comes to the rule that when you do shchita for a chaya or a bird, right, a non-domesticated animal or a bird, you have to cover the blood. Um, it's a mitzvah in the Torah. Um, now, what happens if the blood falls into before you get to cover it? It falls into a pail of water. Then you still have to do kisui. Like then, that those um, drops of blood that fall into the water still require being covered. Lefi she'en dichlei b'mitzvos. Why? Because um, it doesn't get canceled from its mitzvah, from the status of having to do the mitzvah of kisui, right? Even though the blood fell into the water, if you could later cover that blood, like because you're adding more and more blood to the water, and then eventually there's a majority of blood, or it looks like blood, um, then um, it requalifies for um, for being subject to kisui, which is not the case with the with what we're talking about, which is the kachim and the avoda. Okay,
How much blood would have to fall in to require kisui with
great question. So I don't know because I mean. It's kind of implied here that we apply the same rules that we do for kachim, but on the other hand, generally speaking, with things that are not kachim, we rely on volume, right, and not appearance. So it's not covered here at all. Um, but I see a note here referencing the Gemara and Mishnah Chulin that is also that kisui also depends on what it looks like. Okay, so that's why we're comparing the two. Amar Reish Lakish, Hapigol v'hanoser v'tamei shebelalon zeh b'zeh v'chalan. Let's say you have pieces of meat. Some are pigul, some are nosar, left over, some are tame, and they all got mixed up together, and you ate some potter. Then you're not you're. I mean, it's also it's forbidden to eat all of those things, but um, onus, there's no punishment, no liability. Why? Because there's got to be a majority of, like, at one point, let's say you're chewing the meat, let's say you've got two pieces of meat in your mouth, and you're chewing them and swallowing them. At some point, you're going to have a um, a majority of what's in your mouth to be or one kind or the other. Um, like there's no way to, if you're eating them all together, there's no way to determine which one was the majority at any point in time because you're actively chewing and swallowing. Does that make sense? So the key point here is that for any kind of onesh, you need edim v'asra. You have to have witnesses, and they have to warn you, like, don't do this, or you will get malchus, or whatever the punishment is. Um, so if they don't know what to warn you about, right, it can't be provisional. It's like, if you eat this, you're going to get the punishment for meat that's tame. But maybe it's not, maybe uh, what you end up eating is not the majority tame, but majority pigul. So they gave you the wrong one. There's no way for them to know in advance which thing to warn you about. Okay, so that's why there's no punishment. It's a technicality. So Shmami Natslas, and the Gemara says we get three things that you can learn from here. Shmami Na Isurim Mevatlin Zazet. So first of all, you can see that one Isur can cancel out the other. If you have a majority of forbidden type A and a minority of forbidden type B, then it's all considered type A, right? So then, so again, if you'd given Hasra about type B, it would be the wrong Hasra. Ushmamina nosin tam barov lav daraisa, and we can see that, okay, ordinarily ordinarily you need a certain quantity to cancel in a mixture for one type to cancel the other. But there's also a rule of nosin tam, right? That even if you have a small amount of type A in type B, if it's a strong flavor, if it gives the whole mixture of flavor, like imagine, hot peppers, right? It doesn't take very much hot peppers to make your guacamole very spicy. Okay, even if it's a small amount, it's no same time. You can taste it. So now, if that were a doraisa thing, that no same time is a factor that determines the nature of the mixture. If that were doraisa, then then we could say that, like, if you have one stronger flavor, then that could affect the whole mixture, even if while you're chewing it, it becomes a very small amount of type A versus type B. But if it's no St. Tom, it wouldn't matter. So this shows us that no St. Tom must not be a doraisa thing. In other words, we don't take that into account. Ushmami no hasra safek lo shma hasra. And the basic thing, which I started off with, is that the whole reason that you can't make someone liable for this is that you don't know what to warn them about, right? So that implies that you can't say, well, you might be getting punishment for tame meat or for nosar meat, one or the other, right? I'm warning you about both, but that's a hasra suffix. You're not saying this is definitely a problem because you're going to get punished for tame meat. No, it might be the other thing, and so that shows us that a provisional warning is not sufficient.
Isn't
Uh,
no thing, Tom, relevant to basar b'chalav,
yeah,
this
absolutely.
olive
Yes,
pot?
it is.
So that if somebody cook the, I don't know, mm, it's a question, you cook meat in the pot that was used for cheese soup,
Hmm.
cheese souffle, it
Hmm.
requires the pot has nothing down from the cheese, right?
Yes, that's right. But that's all rabbinic, not deraisa, if I'm not mistaken. And that's what seems to be implied here as well.
So when we're learning the Basa v'chalav, we say it's asur to levashel, leachol, levashel, lehanot. So that's even though there's a pasuk al tevashel gidi b'chalev imo, that's the right. But they're all the rules after it are rabbinic. Then is that what
Um,
you're saying?
yes, I believe
That's
that's correct.
correct. That's
That's
correct.
correct.
A derivative would be something like you're grilling a hamburger and you put the cheese on top of the hamburger when they're both on the grill, the cheese melts in the hamburger. That's a deraita. That's a deraita prohibition. But to cook a hamburger on a grill that had cheese on it before and you've cleaned the grill, that's a derabanan.
Right. And usually I think that the Nosen Tom in Kashrus is mostly discussed in terms of how the pot or the grill, in your case,
Right,
Charlotte, kind of
right.
expels the flavor that it had absorbed before.
Right, which is an interesting situation because there's some kalim that actually would not do that, but I think the custom is to be strict.
Yeah. Um, Whereas the actual mixture depends more on volume, right? Like the actual, if you pour milk into your meat stew while it's cooking, that's more of a volume question rather than no Tom, I think. Okay, but continuing on this no Tom idea, Masir Brava, Rav asked about that. Also, isa mina chitin mina aras. What if you make dough from a mixture of wheat and rice? Okay, so I'm sorry, hold on one second, please. Okay, sorry, you guys still there?
Yeah.
I'm
Yes,
still
hello?
here. I'm still.
Okay,
Yes.
1 second. My speaker went off. My audio went off. Okay, say something.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so you have a mixture of dough made from wheat and rice. Um, Im yesh bo tam dagan, chayavas b'challah. If it tastes of grain of the wheat, then you have to take challah from it. V'afal gav deruba orez, even if most of it is rice. So wait a minute, challah is a doraisa mitzvah, right? And what this brisa is saying, this mission is saying, is that no Saint Tom um, is the determining factor, because even if most of the mixture is rice, if it tastes like wheat, we consider it wheat and has a mitzvah of challah. So doesn't that indicate that no Saint Tom is a doraisa concept? So Gemara says no, midrabanan. Now what it means is it's not. It may not be chayav and chala doraisa, but midrabanan is chayav and chala. Okay, Yihache, if that's the case, ema sefa. Wait, look at the end of that mishnah. Adam yotze ba yedei chavaso b'Pesach. This mixture of wheat and rice, if you make matzah with it, you can do the mitzvah of eating matzah. Now that's definitely a doraisa thing. There's no such thing as a drabanan fulfillment of the mitzvah of eating matzah, right? That's definitely a derisa thing. Like either you're doing it right or you're not. The rabbis don't have the power the rabbis have the power to say, do something extra, but they don't have the power to say that if you're doing something that biblically is not the mitzvah of eating matzah, they can't make it matzah, right? So clearly we're talking about derisa things. So now the Gemara takes another approach. Ella min b'she'eno mino b'tama. If it's two different kinds of foods like wheat and rice, then that is deraisa determined by the by the flavor. Min b'mino beruba. But if it's one type of food that's being mixed together, then we go by the volume and not by the taste. So we have, so there is, if it's min b'she'eno mino, then we go by taste, even doraisa. So now the Gemara asks, "When the shar min b'mino, kamin b'she'eno mino." We should figure out we should figure the mixture of min b'mino as if it were min b'she'eno mino. What does this mean? Ditan, we have a mishnah. Our Mishnah. Nisarif b'yayin, if the blood get mixed up with wine, rowing oso kiluhu mayim, then you consider it as if the wine were water and determine the volume that way. My love, rowing oso liyayin kiluhu mayim, doesn't that mean you look at the wine as if it were water, which is how we've been explaining it, right? That you consider how much water would have canceled the blood. That's how much wine would cancel the blood. So in our case, in the case of the what we're proposing, in the case we're proposing, we should do the same thing, like consider it like it were a different type of food, right? Why are you saying that there's different rules for the same things mixed together and different things mixed together? We see that we mix and match, if you will, that they're interchangeable. So Gemara says, no, you're understanding the Mishnah wrong. Rowing also ladam ki iluhu mayim. We consider the blood as if it were water. Okay, so in other words, it would be disqualified by majority of wine. So if that's the case, why is the Mishnah should say it's batel? Why is it saying rowing? Right? Why, if you want to say that it's if you want to interpret the Mishnah as being about rov and bitul, it should say so. It shouldn't say rowing. The appearance matters. V'yod Tanya, and also we have a brayso. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, rowing osakilu yain adam. Rabbi Yehuda says we look at it as if it were. Okay, this is a different case. Okay, so yes, take a step back here. This Rabbi Yehuda is referring to the case as follows. The Gemara will quote the whole brisa, but basically, if you have a bucket that's tame, and it has something in it that's not water, but it's a clear liquid like wine, okay, white wine, like white wine, and you put it in the mikveh. So does the wine in the bucket, does that, like, is that a chatzitza? Does that interrupt between the water of the mikvah and the pail? Now, if it were water, right, then what's the rule? Water that comes in contact with mikvah water becomes part of the mikvah, right? So it would not be a problem. But what about the wine? So Rabbi Yehuda says, "Roi nosa kilu yain adam," view it as if it were red wine. Im diha mareu, if it dilutes so much that you know that it's so pale that by dilution in the mikvah water, then it's okay. Then it's likely you consider it as if it were all water immersing the bucket. V'im lav possible, but if the wine in the bucket, and if it were red wine, and if that amount of wine in the bucket would still look like there were wine in the bucket and not water, then that's a chatzitza. Then it's not a valid. Then it's not a valid tefillah. Okay, so how does that apply to us? The same should be true with our two with min b'mino, right? We should not be mevatel the usher one with just a majority of the permissible one, right? We should not be mevatel um, the wine just by a we should not be mevatel blood. Sorry, we should not make the blood considered not blood just by a majority of wine. So Gemara answers Tanai. Indeed, it's a machlokes Tanaim. To Tanya. Here's
What is the chatzitza? The chatzitza is what, the bucket?
the liquid in the bucket. You have a bucket with some liquid in it. Okay, the
Right.
bucket is tame. You put it in the mikvah, right? Now, if it's all water touching all parts of the bucket, you're good. But
Right.
if imagine if it were a more viscous substance at the bottom of the bucket. Okay, let's say you had some, I don't know, some tar at the bottom of the bucket, right? The water doesn't really penetrate it, right? The water doesn't dilute the tar, right? So you haven't really done tefillah on the whole bucket, right? But if it's a non-viscous liquid, and it kind of not dissolves, but it kind of mixes with the water, and the water actually contacts all parts of the bucket, then it's good. Then it's a good tefillah, right?
What,
It's
the tevila of the liquid, the tevila of the bucket?
the bucket.
So
The
the
question
one,
is, does the liquid in the bucket interrupt between the water of the mikvah and the bucket itself? Okay, so what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is, well, you can see if it's red wine and you can and it doesn't look like wine anymore. That means that sufficient water got mixed into the bucket that it's the wine is not interrupting between the wine and the bucket anymore. And use the same measure for measuring white wine or colorless liquids. Get it?
so one wants to tovel the bucket. Is that it? Or
Yeah,
tovel?
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yes. I'm sorry, I should have made that clear. Yes, you're trying to total the bucket, but it's got this other liquid in it. So does that liquid that's in it before you dunk it in the mikvah, does that interrupt? Does that interrupt between the water and the bucket? So it depends. You can tell by the color. What if it's a colorless liquid? Imagine that it were a red liquid, and then that same volume is and viscosity, I guess, is what is the determining factor.
So does it depend on volume here?
Um, yes and no. Okay, it depends on appearance, but if it's something which has the same appearance as water, then you go by analogy to the colored liquid, what volume that would be that would change the appearance. So it's kind of both. The real criteria is the appearance. Were it to be, if it were a different color, if it were red wine. But since you can't use that measure with white wine, since it looks the same as water, you use the measure of the volume of red wine that would have qualified as as the appearance of wine.
There's a Mishnah in Beitza which describes discussed in, I think, commentary, that if water, you put a bucket in the mikvah, and if the level of the water no shake nishika with the water of the mikvah, then that water is is tahor, becomes then they're mixed. It's sufficient. Nishika is sufficient. But it wasn't talking about the container, but it was talking
Right. We're not talking about interruption of the container. We're talking about the status of the water that came in contact with the mikvah water. Then that magically becomes part of the mikvah.
right.
Yeah.
So here we seem
But
to be talking
but
about
if
the
it's not
container.
water, but that only works if it's water. What if
Right,
it's something else? Then it doesn't
right.
work. Right. Then it's a question of how viscous is it and what is the relative volume and so on.
So here, are we talking about the container? Or are we talking about
No, we're
the
talking about the
liquid?
container is what you're trying to put in the mikvah to make tahor.
Uh-huh.
But the
Okay.
question is, did the liquid in the container, is that a problem? Did that get in the way? You know?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, just finish up. So Tanaihi, and we have this idea of rowing is actually a machlokas tanaim, the Tanya. Deli sheish v'yayin lavan o chalav v'hit bilav. The same case, you have a bucket that has white wine or milk in it, and you want to toivel the bucket. Holchin acharov. Go by the relative volume, right? If there's more milk than water in the bucket, then it's milk, and the tefillah is no good. If there's more water than milk in the bucket, then it's water. Then the whole thing's considered water, and it is good. Imdiha mareu kasher. Oh, sorry, I missed something. But Rabbi Yehuda, remember, Rabbi Yehuda says, and this is the Rabbi Yehuda we quoted above, you look at it as if it were red wine. So go by the color. If you do an experiment with red wine, right? And if in your experiment the same volume of red wine would have paled so much that it doesn't look like wine anymore, it looks like water, kosher. Then that's the volume, that volume of foreign substance of red wine, and by analogy, milk or white wine, that is sufficient to make it kosher or not. Puzzle. If it doesn't, if that volume of foreign liquid would retain its color, if it were red wine, then that's not mikvah water in the bucket. That's wine in the bucket, and then it's not a kosher tefillah. Okay. All right.
Do we know what the quantity is yet or not? We don't
No,
really.
that's really interesting, right? You would think like red wine is red wine, right? It's odd to me that the Mishnah wouldn't just give you a volume, like 20 to 1 or 60 to 1 or whatever. Instead, it leaves it up to you to do this estimation, and to look at it and determine what you think it looks like.
Uh-huh.
It's very unusual. Like I would think. I mean, the only thing you could say is, well, there's different strengths of wine, right? Some wine is more red than other wine, but I don't know if that's really true. Or like red wine is typically red wine. I mean, we're not talking about rosé here. We're talking about red wine. They
Right.
all look the same to
Right.
me.
I'm
Um,
not quantity, but I think it is that they do differ a little bit.
yeah, but not that much.
Experiment.
Yeah, I would have expected the Gemara or the Mishnah to lay down a rule like red wine, 30 to 1 or whatever, but it does not.
Grape with different kinds of grape juice.
Different varieties of grapes, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know what? You take any bottle of red, and again, I'm not talking about rosé wines. I'm talking about red wine. Take any bottle of red wine. Some of them are a little darker, some are a little less dark, but I would say that there's not that much of a variation in terms of how much water it takes to dilute it enough that it doesn't look red anymore. That's just my
We,
guess.
we should have a CM for this Masetta
And
and
have all different kinds of wine and do the experiment.
yes.
I'm in.
I just have a diuk on the earlier piece of Gemara. We were talking about mixing the the um the lechem with the oras, right? And
Yeah.
and question whether it's challah or not challah, and then the Gemara brought up the issue of Pesach. Was the Gemara? Did the Gemara want to say that even with that mixture, it could be kosher lamatzah? Was that the Havamina there?
Yeah.
So, but rice among Ashkenazim anyway is not used on Pesach.
All right. Well, it's clear from the Gemara that rice is not a problem.
That's what I
That's
want. That
a
was the
later.
diuk. That was the diuk there I had. I was a little puzzled by
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but I mean that's everybody recognizes that. There's no, yeah, but you're right. I mean that is true. That does definitely show that rice is not chametz on Pesach.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we'll stop here for today and pick it up tomorrow. Have a good day, everybody.